If you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden corners of history, please consider following for more stories from the shadows. The year was 1965. Moscow, in the grip of a thaw that was more political theater than meteorological fact, remained a city of gray facades and guarded glances. The snow, a persistent, dirty slush, clung to the corners of Gorky Street, refusing to yield to the weak March sun. It was here, amidst the muted roar of Chaika limousines and the hurried footsteps of comrades bundled in heavy wool, that Svetlana Ivanovna Rostova operated her small flower shop, Tsveti na Gorkogo. The shop was a relic, a pocket of fragile color in a world of concrete and ideological rigor. It smelled of damp earth, hyacinths, and the faint, sweet decay of petals that had waited too long for a buyer. Svetlana, a woman in her late 40s whose face had settled into a permanent expression of mild, weary concern, had inherited it from her father. He had been a botanist of some local repute. She was merely a survivor. Her husband, Mikhail, an engineer at a textile plant, had been lost 5 years prior, a term delivered by a grim-faced party official, a phrase that hung in the air, heavy and undefined, suggesting an industrial accident that invited no further questions. Svetlana lived in the small apartment above the shop, a proximity that blurred the line between her work and her life until only the work remained. Her days were a rhythm of cutting stems under cold water, her fingers chapped and raw, of wiring roses for state funerals, and of counting kopecks in the failing light. Across the wide avenue, visible from her front window as she arranged displays of stubborn, pale carnations, stood apartment building 14. It was not like the others. While its neighbors were utilitarian blocks, building 14 was an older, ornate structure of gray stone, its entrance flanked by heavy, polished doors. It was what the neighbors called a guest house. It had no permanent tenants, yet it was never empty. Black Volgas would arrive at odd hours, depositing men in dark, well-cut suits, or occasionally, visitors who looked distinctly foreign, African, Arab, or European, who would disappear inside for days, only to be whisked away again. Svetlana paid it little mind. It was part of the city's geography, like the Kremlin or the ever-present Militchener on the corner, a man whose gaze seemed to measure the world in potential infractions. In 1965, Moscow, to observe too closely was to invite observation. Svetlana Rostova wanted only to be left alone, to sell her flowers, and to survive the long, gray winters of her life. The shop was her sanctuary, her small patch of earth, and she tended to it with a quiet desperation, unaware that the geography of Gorky Street had placed her on a map she could not comprehend. The first approach was not clandestine. It was painfully, almost absurdly, normal. It arrived in the form of Mrs. Eleanor Davies, the wife of a mid-level cultural attaché at the American Embassy. Mrs. Davies was a whirlwind of Western color. She wore bright blue coats, spoke atrocious, enthusiastic Russian, and possessed an insatiable, baffling love for houseplants. She became a regular in the late spring of 1965. "Svetlana Ivanovna, your ferns are the only ones in Moscow that don't look depressed," she would declare, her voice cutting through the shop's quiet. Svetlana was wary. Association with foreigners, especially Americans, was a complex transaction. It brought prestige. Her neighbors noted the diplomatic plates, but it also brought scrutiny. Yet Mrs. Davies paid in rubles, often overpaying, and she brought gifts. A bag of real coffee, a pair of nylon stockings still in their American wrapper, a bar of chocolate so rich it seemed decadent. Over weeks of ferns and pleasantries, Mrs. Davies learned of Svetlana's modest struggles. The state supplier was unreliable. The greenhouse heating was archaic. Mrs. Davies listened, her expression one of profound, sympathetic understanding. Then, one rainy Tuesday, the conversation shifted. "You have such a wonderful view here, Svetlana," Mrs. Davies remarked, gazing out the window at Building 14. "It is just a building, Eleanor Yakovlevna." "Oh, but it's fascinating. My husband, well, you know, diplomats. We are always curious about traffic." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "We have this silly bet at the embassy about that building. How many visitors it gets." Svetlana stiffened. "I do not watch the building." "Of course not. Goodness, no." Mrs. Davies became flustered, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "It's just, I was wondering, you see so much. Would you perhaps, just for fun, keep a little log? Just the cars. Make, color. I would win $50 from that dreadful man in the British delegation." It seemed harmless, ridiculous even, a foreigner's game. But Mrs. Davies was offering a significant sum, enough to fix the greenhouse boiler before winter. "It would just be for a week," she pressed, sensing the hesitation. "Just the cars. What harm could there be in that?" Svetlana looked at the peeling paint on her wall, thought of the coming frost, and nodded. "Just the cars," she agreed. "For 1 week." The first compromise was made. Svetlana began to watch Building 14, her small notebook hidden beneath the counter, noting the arrival of a black chika, the departure of a gray pobeda. It was, she told herself, just a silly game for a rich American. The game lasted 2 weeks. Svetlana's notes were meticulous. Mrs. Davies was delighted, bringing a whole crate of Dutch tulip bulbs, a fortune in Moscow. But the following week she did not come alone. She brought Mr. Arthur. Arthur Kincaid did not look like Mrs. Davies. Where she was bright color, he was muted tones. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit that did not shout American. He was polite, his Russian nearly flawless, and he had the calm, steady eyes of a man who was never surprised. He was introduced as a trade specialist from the embassy, interested in the import-export potential of flowers. They met not in the shop, but on a bench in Gorky Park, the pretense of a casual stroll. Mrs. Davies, having made the introduction, suddenly remembered an urgent appointment, leaving Svetlana alone with him. "Mrs. Davies is a fine woman," Arthur began, feeding a piece of bread to a persistent pigeon. "But she is not a details person." "The list of cars was correct," Svetlana said defensively. "Oh, absolutely." Kincaid smiled, a brief professional gesture. "You are very observant, Svetlana Ivanovna. That is a rare quality." He paused, the smile fading. "We are not interested in traffic patterns." A cold knot formed in Svetlana's stomach. "Then what?" "The building across from your shop, apartment 14. It is not a guest house. It is a processing center and safe house for the first chief directorate, the PGU." Svetlana said nothing. The name alone was enough to chill the blood. The PGU was the KGB's foreign intelligence arm. "The men who visit," Kincaid continued, his voice low and even, "are Soviet agents being sent abroad, or foreign assets being debriefed. The men who live there are high-value targets." He turned to look at her, his gaze unwavering. "Your husband, Mikhail, the textile plant, it was not an accident." Svetlana felt the world tilt. What do you mean?" "The accident was 3 days after he complained to the district committee about substandard materials being diverted from the factory floor. He was a good engineer. He was also an honest man. The system does not reward honesty, Svetlana." He presented it not as an accusation, but as a shared, unfortunate fact. He had seen her file. He knew her struggles, her quiet resentment, her loneliness. "What Mrs. Davies asked of you was a test," he said. "You passed. What I'm offering is not a game. It is a chance to balance the books, to ensure the people who took Mikhail from you do not have things so easy." He wasn't offering money, not yet. He was offering purpose. He was offering a narrative for her loss. The discovery for Svetlana was not about the PGU. It was the realization that her small gray life had been noticed, that her quiet pain had been cataloged by strangers, and that it was now being leveraged. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "I want you to keep selling flowers," Kincaid said, standing up and brushing crumbs from his coat. "But I also want you to take pictures. We will provide everything. You will just sell your flowers, and you will watch." The shop's transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible. Operation Tisveti, as it was known in the Langley, Virginia, a long way away, was not about high-tech gadgets. It was about patience and the mundane. Kincaid's team never visited the shop. Their tradecraft was impeccable. A plumber arrived one afternoon while Svetlana was out, a meeting with Kincaid at the Pushkin Museum. The plumber, an agency technical officer, spent 3 hours fixing a leaky pipe in the back room. When Svetlana returned, The shop was unchanged, save for three things. First, her heavy, old-fashioned cash register had been replaced. The new one was slightly more modern, but still plausibly Soviet. Its true function was concealed. A small, high-resolution camera was mounted behind a decorative metal grille on its front. A simple, silent foot pedal, disguised as a loose floorboard beneath her counter, activated the shutter. She could ring up a sale of carnations, and with a tap of her foot, photograph the man walking out of Building 14 across the street. Second, a new bulky shortwave radio appeared in her apartment upstairs. It was a gift from the plumber, a supposedly defective unit he couldn't be bothered to take back to his workshop. This radio contained a burst transmitter. Once a week, at an agonizingly specific time, Svetlana would type a coded message, a series of numbers representing the day's observations, into a small device, attach it to the radio, and press a button. For 3 seconds, a compressed squeal would be sent, received by a listening post miles away. Third, the fertilizer. Once a month, a dead drop was arranged. Svetlana would go to a specific trash receptacle in the Izmailovsky Park, leaving a package of waste, her exposed film. She would then proceed to a different location, a loose brick in a cemetery wall, where she would retrieve a new package, fresh film, batteries, and her compensation tucked inside a hollowed-out book. Her life became a performance of dual realities. By day, she was the mild-mannered florist, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped bouquets. She learned to time her sales with the arrivals and departures at Building 14. A tap of the foot, click. A PGU colonel, a tap, click. A visiting East German trade delegate. The stress was immense. She began to mix up orders. She gave a bride a wreath of funeral lilies. Her customers, loyal Muscovites, noted her distraction. They attributed it to grief, to the economy, to the poor quality of the potatoes. Meanwhile, at the Second Chief Directorate, KGB counterintelligence headquarters, a patient, methodical man named Major Dmitry Volkov was reviewing routine pattern analysis reports. One report, generated by an early, room-sized computer, noted a statistical anomaly. The flower shop on Gorky Street, Tsvetina Gorkogo, had, in the last 6 months, shown a 400% increase in profitability and a sudden diversification of stock. Its struggling proprietor was now importing rare Dutch tulips. Volkov, a man who believed in patterns above all else, made a note. It was time, he decided, to buy his wife some flowers. The confrontation, when it came, was not a dramatic showdown. It was a quiet, suffocating pressure, a collision of two separate secret worlds. It began with a target of opportunity. A message arrived from Kincaid via a coded wrong number phone call. Expect an important delivery. Langley had intelligence that a very high-level official, a PGU general rumored to be the architect of Soviet policy in West Africa, was scheduled to visit Building 14. Kincaid wanted face shots. The general arrived on a frigid Thursday. Svetlana saw the motorcade pull up. He was a large man, flanked by bodyguards. She positioned herself at the register, her heart a cold drum against her ribs. She waited for him to exit the building, to turn just so. As he emerged, she pressed the foot pedal. Nothing. She pressed it again, harder, a flicker of panic. Nothing. The mechanism was jammed. The general got into his Chaika and was gone. The failure was total. Svetlana was frantic. She couldn't fix the camera, and she couldn't risk sending a burst transmission reporting the failure. Her next scheduled meeting with Kincaid was 2 days later, a brush pass at the Bolshoi. As they passed in the opulent, crowded lobby during intermission, he didn't even look at her. He simply whispered, "Unacceptable. Do not fail again." His voice was not angry. It was cold, the voice of a manager disappointed with an underperforming asset. The personal connection, the shared balancing of the books for her husband, was gone. It was just a transaction. She returned to the shop, her sense of dread profound. And sitting on the small stool by the ferns, waiting for her, was Major Dmitry Volkov. He was not in uniform. He looked like any other customer, perhaps a professor or a mid-level bureaucrat. He was smiling politely. "Svetlana Ivanovna Rostova?" he asked, his voice soft. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I hope so. My wife's anniversary is today. I am told you have the best tulips in Moscow. He walked around the small shop, touching a petal here, sniffing a rose there. It must be very difficult running a business alone, especially one so successful. These Dutch imports, he gestured to the tulips. They must cost a fortune to acquire. Svetlana's hands, clumsy with the jammed camera and Kincaid's rebuke, were now slick with cold sweat. I have good suppliers. I am sure you do. Volkov selected a dozen red tulips. Your shop is very strategic. A wonderful location. You see all of Gorky Street from here, I imagine. He walked to the window, looking directly at Building 14. So much activity. He turned back to her, his eyes previously mild, now holding a keen, analytical light. You must be very observant, Svetlana Ivanovna. It was the exact phrase Kincaid had used. Svetlana wrapped the flowers, her fingers fumbling with the paper. My department, Volkov said, paying with crisp new rubles, is very interested in small businesses, in helping them. We like to ensure all their equipment is properly registered, that their suppliers are official. He took the flowers. A faulty cash register, for example. That could be a terrible inconvenience. One should always report faulty equipment. He left. He had not accused her of anything. He had not threatened her. He had simply bought flowers. But Svetlana knew, with absolute, paralyzing certainty, that she had just been identified. The confrontation was over. The game had changed. The panic that followed Volkov's visit was a cold, sharp thing. Svetlana had two choices: contact Kincaid via an emergency signal, a chalk mark on a specific mailbox, or do nothing. To activate the emergency signal was to admit the operation was compromised, effectively ending her utility and possibly exposing Kincaid. To do nothing was to wait for the inevitable. She chose a third path. She tried to disappear into her routine. She stopped using the camera. She stopped watching the building. She sold flowers, her mind a blank wall of terror. Kincaid, sensing her paralysis, pushed. A new message arrived. The fertilizer is spoiling. We need a delivery. He wanted the film, even the film of her failure with the general. He needed to know what had gone wrong. This was the fatal error. Kincaid, operating from the sterile logic of his station, believed the asset was just spooked. He calculated that forcing her to complete one more cycle, one more dead drop, would restore her confidence, bring her back into the fold. Volkov, operating from the patient logic of counterintelligence, predicted this. He didn't raid the shop. He didn't arrest Svetlana. That would have been loud. It would have confirmed to the Americans that their operation was blown, and crucially, how it was blown. Volkov wanted more. He wanted the network. He put the Tsvetina Gorkogo on 24-hour surveillance. Not the shop itself, but Svetlana. Two men, nondescript and utterly professional, followed her. On the day of the scheduled dead drop, Svetlana left the shop, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, the film canister in her bag. She took the metro to Izmailovsky Park. She felt the eyes on her, the invisible weight of observation. She tried to follow her training. Dry cleaning routes, sudden reversals, checking reflections in shop windows. But she was a florist, not a spy. The men behind her were ghosts, melting into the sparse crowds. She reached the designated trash receptacle. Her hand was in her bag. She just needed to drop the parcel. As she touched the cold metal of the receptacle, a voice, calm and polite, spoke just behind her ear. That is not an authorized disposal unit, Svetlana Ivanovna. She turned. Two men in dark coats stood there. They were not Volkov. They were the muscle. Behind them, stepping out from behind a large oak tree, was Volkov himself. He gestured to the parcel. May I? She didn't hand it over. Her fingers simply lost their strength, and he took it from her. He unwrapped it, looked at the film canister, and nodded, as if confirming a simple hypothesis. It is a very cold day, Volkov said, gesturing to a black Volga parked on the access road. You should not be out here. There has been a serious misunderstanding about your business license. We need you to come and clarify the paperwork. The arrest was polite. It was bureaucratic. There was no struggle. As they guided her into the car, Svetlana looked back at the park. A mother was pushing a child on a swing. The world had not stopped. It had simply moved on without her. The destination was not the infamous Lubyanka, at least not at first. It was a processing center, a sterile building of yellow brick and polished linoleum floors. The room she was taken to was not a cell, it was an office. It was brightly lit, smelled faintly of floor wax and stale tobacco, and contained a simple wooden desk and 3 chairs. Volkov sat opposite her. He offered her tea, which she declined. He placed the film canister on the desk between them. Then he placed the jammed foot pedal. Then the ashes from her burnt one-time pads, carefully collected from the stove in her apartment. Finally, he placed a stack of glossy photographs, images of the PGU general, the East German, the PGU colonel, all taken from her window. They were not her photos. They were the KGB's photos, taken by their surveillance team, monitoring her surveillance. "You see, Svetlana Ivanovna," Volkov began, his voice that of a disappointed tutor, "the problem is not your espionage. The problem is your technique. It is very clumsy." There was no yelling. There were no threats of physical harm. The strategy was purely psychological. Volkov did not want secrets. He already had them. He wanted conversion. He wanted to dismantle her, piece by piece, and rebuild her as a lesson. He spent the first 3 hours lecturing her on the history of the Second Chief Directorate. He explained the science of pattern recognition. He detailed with academic precision every mistake she and Kincaid had made. "The tulips," he said, "were the first tell. An anomaly. You were a struggling business, yet you acquired high-value imports. Where did the capital come from? An American cultural attaché who suddenly develops a passion for ferns? It is a cliché, Svetlana." He moved on to the technical errors. The burst transmitter. "Your Mr. Arthur is an amateur. He had you transmitting from your own apartment. The signal was a beacon. We knew the building you were in for 3 months. We just had to identify the apartment." He slid a photograph across the table. It was of her, in her nightgown, standing by the radio. But the fatal flaw, Volkov said, steepling his fingers, was arrogance. Theirs, and by extension yours. They believed a simple florist could outwit the state. They believed you, a Soviet woman, would betray your motherland for what? Nylon stockings? Revenge for an industrial accident? He leaned in, his voice dropping. Mikhail was a good man. He was also a careless one. His complaint was not about faulty materials. It was about state materials being diverted for a state project of higher priority. He interfered in matters he did not understand. The state corrected the imbalance. It was not malice. It was procedure. He had taken her one justification, the pillar of Kincaid's recruitment, and reduced it to a bureaucratic adjustment. The interrogation lasted for days, but it was not about information. It was about confession, not of facts, but of ideology. They wanted her to admit that her actions were not just illegal, but un-Soviet. Her trial was a formality, lasting 20 minutes in a closed windowless room. The charge was treason. The evidence was the pile on Volkov's desk. She was found guilty. There was no outrage, no grand political statement. There was only the quiet, efficient processing of the system. In the American embassy, Arthur Kincaid stared at his whiskey. The fail-safe signal had been activated. 3 days after Svetlana's pickup in the park, a janitor at the Bolshoi, another low-level agency spotter, had placed a specific brand of cigarettes in a specific trash can. The operation was rolled up. Kincaid filed his report. Operation Tzveti, terminated. Asset compromised and presumed lost. Probable cause, anomalous purchasing by asset, leading to SCD financial review. Recommend review of procurement protocols for future shopfront operations. The station chief read it, grunted, and signed off. "Shame," the chief said. "That camera angle was prime. Did we get the general?" "No," Kincaid said. "Camera jammed." "Damn. Well, buy the tech boys a drink. That pedal was supposed to be foolproof." Kincaid left the embassy and walked through the Moscow streets. He felt a brief professional irritation. The asset had been soft, unreliable. The Mikhail angle, which he had been so proud of, had clearly not been enough to ensure her discipline. He felt no guilt. It was a cost of doing business. He was already thinking about his next target, a disaffected GRU lieutenant who had a weakness for Western jazz records. For Svetlana, the aftermath was a different kind of gray. She was not sent to Siberia. That was the old way. She was sent to Mordovia, to a corrective labor colony designated for political offenders. It was a vast, cold facility where the work was mending uniforms. The routine was designed to erase identity. There were no flowers, only gray wool, the clack of sewing machines, and the dogma of re-education classes. Her name was gone. She was just a number. The tragedy was not dramatic. It was the slow, methodical daily erosion of herself. She thought of her shop, of the smell of hyacinths, and it felt like a life lived by someone else. Back on Gorky Street, Svetlana Gorkogo was closed. A sign was pasted on the window. Closed for inventory by order of the state. The flowers inside wilted, turned brown, and decayed. The shop sat empty for a month, a dark tooth in the street's smile, before a state-run Nigi bookstore took over the space, its windows filled with the works of Lenin. Years dissolved. The Cold War, the lumbering beast of ideological certainty, began to crack at its foundations. In 1989, Arthur Kincaid was retired, living in Arlington, Virginia. He wrote a classified monograph for the agency's Internal History Project, a review of Operation Sveti, Lessons in Asset Management. He described Svetlana as a typical Level 2 asset, high utility, low awareness, but ultimately unstable under direct counterintelligence pressure. He received a commendation for his clear-eyed analysis. He sometimes wondered what happened to the florist, but the thought passed quickly, like the shadow of a cloud. In Moscow, General Dmitry Volkov was a revered instructor at the KGB Academy. His lecture on the Sveti case was a favorite among the cadets. He used it to illustrate the Volkov doctrine, that counterintelligence was not about force, but about patience. The amateur, he would tell his students, looks for the spy. The professional looks for the anomaly. Look for the tulips. Look for the unexplained profit. The ideology will always betray the economics. Find the pattern, and you find the operation. Svetlana Rostova was released in 1987 as part of Glasnost. She had served 22 years. She was a frail woman in her late 60s, her hair white, her eyes pale and empty. She was given a small pension and a one-room apartment in a concrete tower block on the outskirts of Moscow. She returned just once to Gorky Street. It was no longer Gorky Street. It was Tverskaya Street, already filling with the bright, chaotic signs of Western businesses. She found the location of her shop. The bookstore was gone, replaced by a garish new cooperative selling imported electronics. She stood across the street, looking at the windows where her ferns used to sit, and she looked at Building 14. It, too, had changed. The black Volgas were gone. It was now apparently the office of a Finnish timber company. A young man hurried past her, brushing her shoulder. "Izvinite, babushka?" "Excuse me, grandmother," he muttered, already focused on the future. Svetlana stood for a long time in the snow, a ghost on a street she no longer recognized. She felt no anger, no sadness. She felt nothing at all. The system had processed her, and the file was closed. The story of Operation Sveti is not a story of heroes or villains. It is a case study in systems. The Cold War was not merely a conflict of armies or ideologies. It was a vast, grinding machine that consumed the lives of ordinary people as fuel. Svetlana Rostova was not a traitor, nor was she a patriot. She was a resource. The CIA, in its calculated pursuit of data, saw a strategic asset. Her grief was a vulnerability to be exploited. Her shop, a platform to be utilized. Kincaid's approach was a model of amoral asset handling, turning a personal loss into a geopolitical tool. Conversely, the KGB, in its paranoid defense of the Rodina, saw a symptom. Volkov's victory was not in catching a spy, it was in confirming his worldview. The system had to be protected, and any anomaly, a woman, a flower, a financial discrepancy, was a potential vector for infection. His interrogation was not a search for truth. It was an ideological exorcism, a means of reinforcing the state's infallibility. Both systems, in their own way, were built on the dehumanization of the individual. Svetlana's shop, the one place that held her identity and her small measure of peace, was transformed into a surveillance base by one side and an infection by the other. The flowers, symbols of life and fragility, were irrelevant to both. The great game was played on a board that spanned the globe, but its pieces were people like Svetlana, crushed by the casual, bureaucratic necessities of the conflict. The true legacy of the flower shop on Gorky Street is not the intelligence it gathered, which was fleeting, or the spy it uncovered, who was replaceable. The legacy is the quiet final silence of a life hollowed out, a reminder that in the shadow of great powers, the cost of observation is often paid by the one being forced to watch. We'll be back with another story from the archives. Until then, stay observant.